Emily risked death to save a wild bobcat in labor, never imagining the predator would return. Weeks later, she froze as the same golden eyes stared from her porch, but this time, the deadly mother wasn't alone. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The morning sun filtered through the pines surrounding Emily Carson's remote cabin, casting dappled shadows across her weathered porch. 6 months into her self-imposed exile from city life, Emily had grown accustomed to the solitude that enveloped her mountain retreat. What she hadn't anticipated was becoming entangled in one of nature's most dangerous scenarios, coming between a wild predator and survival. As she stepped onto her porch that fateful Thursday morning, coffee mug in hand, the unmistakable sound of distress stopped her cold. A low, guttural moan emanated from beneath the storage shed at the property's edge. Emily knew better than to investigate. 35 years working as a wildlife rehabilitator had taught her that wild animals in distress were unpredictable at best, deadly at worst. But something in that sound, a desperate vulnerability, called to the very core of what had driven her career. Setting her mug on the railing, Emily cautiously approached the shed. The moaning intensified, punctuated by a hiss that raised the hair on her arms. Crouching down, she peered into the darkness beneath the structure. 2 gleaming eyes reflected back, wild with fear and pain. Emily's breath caught in her throat. A bobcat, and not just any bobcat, but one in obvious distress. The animal's sleek form was contorted, its breathing labored. Years of experience told Emily what she was witnessing. This was a female in labor, and something was terribly wrong. "Easy, girl," Emily whispered, though she knew her presence only added to the animal's distress. In her professional life, Emily would have called for backup, prepared a sedative, followed protocols established for exactly this scenario. But here, miles from civilization, with retirement having separated her from the equipment and team she once relied on, Emily faced an impossible choice: intervene alone or let nature take its course, however brutal that might be. The bobcat's eyes fixed on her, intelligence and agony reflected in equal measure. Another contraction visibly rippled through the feline's body, yet no progress followed. Emily had seen this before: dystocia, a birthing complication that would likely kill both mother and kittens without intervention. Her mind raced through possibilities, each more dangerous than the last. Wild bobcats weren't like the rehabilitation cases she'd handled. Those animals had grown somewhat accustomed to human presence. This was a fully wild predator, driven to desperation by pain and maternal instinct. Emily retreated to the cabin, heart pounding against her ribs. Through the window, she watched the storage shed, weighing her options. Wildlife services wouldn't arrive in time. The nearest veterinarian was 3 hours away. This was why she'd moved to this isolated mountain retreat in western Montana, to escape responsibility, to no longer be the person making life or death decisions. Yet here she was, facing exactly that. "Damn it," she muttered, reaching for her phone. No signal as usual. The satellite connection in her cabin would allow for email, but that wouldn't bring help any faster. Emily moved methodically through her cabin, gathering items: thick welding gloves left behind by the previous owner, a fishing net, old towels, a first aid kit, a headlamp. From a locked cabinet, she retrieved a small box containing veterinary supplies she'd told herself she was only keeping for emergencies. If anything qualified as an emergency, this was it. Outside, the bobcat's cries had quieted, a concerning development. Emily knew that in wildlife, silence often preceded death. Moving with purposeful calm, she approached the shed again, equipment in hand. The bobcat remained where she'd last seen her, but her golden eyes had glazed with exhaustion, her powerful body now limp against the earth. "I know you don't understand," Emily said softly, preparing a syringe with trembling fingers. "But I'm your only chance now." She'd administered countless injections to wild animals during her career, but always in controlled environments with proper restraints and assistance. What she was attempting was foolhardy, bordering on suicidal. A cornered bobcat, even one weakened by a difficult labor, could inflict devastating damage. Emily assembled the fishing net, her plan crude but necessary. She'd need to capture the bobcat long enough to administer the sedative, then work quickly while the drug took effect. The margin for error was non-existent. Too little sedative and the bobcat would remain dangerous. Too much and she might lose both mother and unborn kittens. As she edged closer, the bobcat summoned one last surge of energy, hissing weakly, paws extending claws that could shred flesh with frightening ease. Emily hesitated, years of professional caution warring with the urgency of the moment. Then the animal's head dropped, her fierce resistance fading as another contraction seized her. "Now or never," Emily whispered, lunging forward with the net. What followed was a blur of movement, the bobcat's surprising burst of energy, claws catching on the netting, the flash of tawny fur as she struggled. Emily felt a searing pain across her forearm but maintained her grip, managing to position the syringe and plunge the needle into the animal's muscle through a gap in the mesh. The bobcat's struggles intensified briefly, then gradually subsided as the sedative took effect. Emily worked quickly, her training overriding fear and pain. Her arm bled freely where the bobcat's claws had connected, but she ignored it, focusing entirely on the task at hand. The problem became clear. A kitten malpositioned in the birth canal. With gentle, practiced movements, Emily repositioned the tiny form, hardly bigger than her palm. Minutes later, the first kitten emerged, followed by a second and then a third. Each tiny life a miracle Emily had never expected to witness again after leaving her career behind. As she finished attending to the mother, cleaning her wounds and administering antibiotics, Emily knew the danger wasn't past. The sedative would wear off soon, and she'd be facing a fully wild bobcat mother with newborns. Perhaps the only scenario more dangerous than what she'd already navigated. With careful movements, Emily constructed a temporary shelter around the area beneath the shed, creating a protected space while giving the small family room to move. She placed water nearby and backed away, retreating to her cabin to finally attend to her own injury. Standing at her kitchen sink, washing the deep gashes that would undoubtedly leave scars, Emily watched through the window as dusk settled over her property. She'd done something recklessly dangerous today, breaking every protocol she'd ever taught to others. Yet as she bandaged her arm, she couldn't summon regret. 3 tiny lives, and their mother had a chance they wouldn't have had otherwise. What Emily didn't realize as she finally sank into her armchair exhausted was that her encounter with the bobcat mother was far from over. The bond forged in that desperate hour would lead to consequences she could never have anticipated, drawing her back into a world she thought she'd left behind forever. The mountain had secrets of its own, and the wild operated by rules humans rarely understood. She had saved a predator today, but what would tomorrow bring? Dawn broke over the mountains with a gentle palette of pinks and golds that belied the tension Emily felt as she approached the makeshift shelter. She'd barely slept, her injured arm throbbing beneath its bandages, her mind replaying the previous day's dangerous encounter. The silence from the shed was concerning. Had the sedative been too strong? Had the mother rejected her kittens after human intervention? Had predators discovered the vulnerable family overnight? Emily approached cautiously, carrying a small offering of raw chicken she'd defrosted, emergency supplies kept for the occasional injured bird she still couldn't help but tend to. The morning air carried a sharp chill, her breath forming small clouds as she moved with deliberate slowness. 6 feet from the shelter, she stopped. A pair of luminous eyes reflected the early light, alert, watchful, and unmistakably alive. "Good morning," Emily whispered, relief flooding through her. The bobcat mother had survived the night. Crouching down, Emily slid the plate of meat forward with a stick, then retreated twice the distance. The bobcat remained motionless, only her eyes tracking Emily's movements. Minutes passed in this standoff before Emily accepted that her presence would prevent the animal from eating. With a sigh, she backed away to the cabin's porch, where she could observe from a distance that wouldn't threaten the new mother. An hour later, Emily smiled as the bobcat finally emerged, moving stiffly but with purpose. The animal inspected the meat, sniffed it suspiciously, then consumed it with efficient bites before disappearing back under the shed. 3 tiny lives had made it through the night alongside their mother, a small victory against overwhelming odds. Over the next 3 days, Emily established a careful routine. Each morning and evening, she left food at a progressively greater distance from the shed, encouraging the mother to strengthen while maintaining her wild instincts. Emily kept her observations brief and unobtrusive, documenting the family's progress in a journal she hadn't touched since retirement. The clinical notes soon gave way to more personal observations. Day 3. Mother moving well, no signs of infection. Kittens vocal during feeding times. Smallest kitten, runt, concerning. Mother appears to be favoring stronger too. By the 5th day, Emily's concern for the smallest kitten had grown. Twice, she'd observed the mother carrying the stronger kittens from beneath the shed into a patch of morning sunlight while leaving the runt behind. Nature's brutal efficiency was at work. Resources diverted to those most likely to survive. Emily battled with herself over whether to intervene. Every professional instinct told her to let nature take its course. Every personal instinct urged her to act. On the morning of the 6th day, the decision was made for her. The bobcat mother emerged from beneath the shed carrying only 2 kittens, setting them down in a patch of sunlight before returning to the shadows. She emerged again moments later, proceeding directly to the food Emily had left without retrieving the 3rd kitten. The message was clear. The runt had not survived the night, or had been abandoned to preserve resources for its siblings. Emily watched the remaining kittens with a mixture of sadness and wonder. They were growing rapidly, their once blind eyes now open, taking in the world with the intense focus characteristic of their species. Their spotted coats blended perfectly with the dappled shadows beneath the pines, an evolutionary camouflage that had served their kind for millennia. Despite herself, Emily had become invested in their survival. That evening, as darkness settled over the mountains, Emily was startled by movement on her porch. Setting aside her book, she peered through the window to find the bobcat mother standing at the edge of the wooden planks, staring directly at the cabin with unsettling intensity. The animal wasn't seeking food. The evening's offering remained untouched by the shed. For nearly 10 minutes, the bobcat remained motionless, her gaze fixed on Emily's silhouette in the window. Then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she melted back into the darkness. "What was that about?" Emily murmured to the empty room. The encounter left her unsettled, a prickling awareness that something had shifted in her relationship with the wild creature. No longer simply predator and reluctant midwife, they had entered some new, undefined territory. The following morning, the shed was empty. The bobcat family had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only tufts of fur and the faintest depressions in the dirt where the kittens had rested. Emily experienced a surprising wave of loss as she inspected the abandoned shelter. She had known, of course, that the bobcat would relocate her young as soon as they were strong enough to travel. It was what any wild mother would do, seeking deeper cover and new hunting grounds. Still, the abruptness of their departure left an unexpected void. "Well, that's that," Emily told herself, dismantling the shelter and returning the materials to her shed. Back to retirement. But as she moved through her daily routine, she found herself scanning the tree line, listening for sounds that might indicate the family's proximity. Her arm itched beneath its healing scabs, a physical reminder of an encounter that was already taking on the quality of a dream. 2 weeks passed. The incident with the bobcat began to settle into memory, taking its place among the countless wildlife encounters of Emily's long career. Spring advanced across the mountainside, bringing with it an explosion of wildflowers and the return of songbirds that had fled south for the winter. Emily settled back into solitude, though she found herself leaving her cabin more often, taking longer walks through the surrounding forest, her senses somehow sharper than they'd been before the bobcat's arrival. It was during one such walk, nearly 3 weeks after the bobcat family's disappearance, that Emily discovered the remains of a freshly killed rabbit at the edge of her clearing. The precision of the kill was unmistakable, clean and efficient, the work of a skilled predator. Yet something about the scene struck Emily as odd. The rabbit had been only partially consumed, left in a location too exposed for normal bobcat behavior, almost as if it had been left deliberately, almost as if it had been left as a gift. Coincidence, Emily said aloud, though doubt colored her voice. She disposed of the remains and continued her walk, unable to shake the feeling of being watched from the shadows between the trees. That night, she dreamed of golden eyes and tiny spotted kittens, and woke with an inexplicable certainty that she would see the bobcat again. The first sign that something unusual was happening came a week after Emily found the rabbit. She woke before dawn, alerted by a noise she couldn't immediately identify. Years of wildlife work had attuned her ears to the symphony of normal forest sounds, the hoo-hoo of owls, the rustling of nocturnal creatures, the occasional distant howl of wolves. This sound belonged to none of those categories. Grabbing her flashlight, Emily moved cautiously to the window. In the weak beam of light, she discovered the source. A freshly killed grouse placed precisely in the center of her porch steps. Like the rabbit before it, the bird was only partially consumed. Unlike the rabbit, there was no mistaking the deliberateness of its placement. This was no random kill abandoned by a passing predator. This was an offering. Impossible, Emily whispered, though decades of observing animal behavior had taught her that impossible often simply meant not yet documented. Wild bobcats didn't bring gifts to humans. They didn't form relationships with people. They were solitary, elusive predators who avoided human contact at all costs. And yet, Emily removed the grouse before sunrise, disturbed by the implications. Throughout her career, she'd maintained a firm boundary between scientific observation and anthropomorphism. Wildlife rehabilitators who projected human emotions onto their charges rarely lasted long in the field. Animals were not people in fur coats. They operated on instinct, survival imperatives, and learned behaviors that had nothing to do with human concepts of gratitude or friendship. Yet as the days passed, Emily found herself watching the forest's edge with a new awareness. Something extraordinary was happening, something that challenged her professional understanding, while awakening a sense of wonder she hadn't felt since her earliest days in wildlife rehabilitation. The gifts continued with irregular frequency. A squirrel one morning, a mole 3 days later, always at dawn, always placed prominently where Emily would find them. She began leaving her own offerings in response. Fresh water in a shallow dish, choice cuts of meat set far enough from the cabin to reinforce proper wariness of humans. These disappeared overnight, though Emily never caught sight of the visitor. A month into this strange exchange, Emily made a decision. Setting up a motion-activated wildlife camera seemed the logical next step, though some part of her hesitated to document the phenomenon. What if recording this behavior somehow disrupted it? What if the bobcat sensed the surveillance and disappeared for good? Despite her reservations, scientific curiosity won out. Emily positioned the camera facing her porch steps and waited. The images captured over the next week confirmed what she had suspected. The bobcat mother, looking healthy and strong, had indeed been leaving the kills. The camera caught her in the act of placing a rabbit at the edge of the porch, her movements deliberate and unhurried. More surprising were the two half-grown kittens that appeared in several frames, hanging back at the forest's edge while their mother made her delivery. They had grown considerably, no longer the helpless newborns Emily had helped bring into the world, but developing predators learning the skills they would need to survive. "Well, I'll be damned," Emily murmured, studying the images with a professional eye. The kittens' coats showed the healthy sheen of proper nutrition. The mother moved with the fluid grace of a predator in her prime. Whatever Emily had done during that desperate intervention had clearly worked. This family was thriving. The question that plagued Emily, keeping her awake at night as she replayed the camera footage in her mind, was, why? Why would a wild bobcat, an animal that typically avoided human contact at all costs, continue to return to a place where she had experienced stress and trauma? Why leave offerings of food when predators were typically fiercely protective of their kills? The behavior defied everything Emily had learned in her decades of wildlife work. On a whim, Emily called her former colleague, Dr. Marcus Reyes, at the University of Montana's Wildlife Biology Department. After exchanging pleasantries and catching up on the 2 years since her retirement, Emily described the situation in careful, scientific terms. "I've documented repeated food-sharing behavior from a wild female bobcat toward a human dwelling," she explained, deliberately omitting her personal involvement in the birth. "The subject returns at regular intervals to deposit partially consumed prey in a visible location, occasionally accompanied by juvenile offspring who remain at a distance." The silence on the other end of the line stretched uncomfortably before Marcus responded. "Emily, if anyone else were telling me this, I'd say they were anthropomorphizing or misinterpreting territorial marking. But you..." His voice trailed off. "You're describing behavior that hasn't been documented in wild bobcats. Are you certain these animals haven't been habituated to humans previously?" "Positive," Emily replied. "Rural area, minimal human presence, no history of feeding or interaction." The last part wasn't strictly true, but Emily wasn't ready to share the full story. Not yet. Not until she understood it herself. "Then what you're describing is significant," Marcus said, excitement creeping into his voice. "Would you consider writing up your observations for the Journal of Wildlife Behavior? Or better yet, allow us to set up additional monitoring equipment? This could be groundbreaking." Emily hesitated. Her retirement had been prompted in part by fatigue with the academic world's endless demand for papers, presentations, and proof. She had come to the mountains to escape exactly this type of scientific scrutiny. More importantly, she felt oddly protective of the bobcat family and their unusual behavior. Turning their interaction into a research project seemed somehow like a betrayal. "Let me document it more thoroughly first," she hedged. "Make sure it's a consistent pattern before we draw any conclusions." After ending the call, Emily sat on her porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The conversation had stirred something in her. The familiar intellectual excitement of discovery, yes, but also a deeper, more personal feeling of connection. For the first time since moving to this remote cabin, Emily no longer felt entirely alone. That night, as darkness settled over the forest, Emily sensed a change in the atmosphere, an expectant hush that made the hair on her arms rise. Setting her book aside, she moved to the window, peering into the darkness beyond the porchlight's feeble reach. There, at the very edge of visibility, 3 pairs of eyes reflected the light. One larger, 2 smaller, all focused intently on her cabin. Emily stood motionless at the window, barely breathing. The 3 sets of glowing eyes remained fixed on the cabin, neither advancing nor retreating. In that suspended moment, Emily felt something pass between them. An acknowledgement, a connection that transcended the natural boundaries between human and wild predator. Then, as if responding to some silent signal, the eyes blinked out one by one, leaving Emily staring into empty darkness, wondering if she had imagined the entire encounter. Sleep eluded her that night. Emily's mind churned with questions, theories, and a growing sense that she stood at the threshold of something unprecedented. By dawn, she had made a decision. If the BOBCAT family was initiating contact, Emily would respond, not as a scientist this time, but as a fellow creature sharing the same mountain. That morning, Emily did something she would have considered professionally irresponsible just weeks before. She placed a small offering of fresh meat on the edge of her porch, retreated inside, and settled in a chair by the window to wait. Hours passed with no sign of the bobcats. Emily read, dozed, made lunch, all while keeping one eye on the porch. The afternoon shadows lengthened into evening, and still the meat remained untouched. Had she misinterpreted? Had her presence the previous night been coincidental rather than deliberate? Just as dusk began to settle over the mountains, movement at the forest's edge caught Emily's attention. The bobcat mother emerged from the underbrush, moving with cautious grace. She paused at the clearing's perimeter, nose testing the air, eyes scanning for threats. Satisfied, she advanced toward the porch with measured steps. Behind her, barely visible in the fading light, her two kittens followed, their movements a miniature echo of their mother's careful precision. Emily sat perfectly still, heart racing as the bobcat approached the porch steps. The animal paused, looking directly toward the window where Emily sat watching. For several breathtaking seconds, their eyes met across the divide of glass and species. Then the bobcat turned her attention to the meat, took it delicately between her jaws, and retreated several yards. Rather than disappearing back into the forest with her prize, she settled onto her haunches and began to eat, keeping her gaze fixed on the cabin. Even more astonishing were the kittens. While their mother ate, they explored the perimeter of the clearing with the boundless curiosity of youth. One pawed at a wind chime hanging from a nearby tree, startling backward when it produced an unexpected tinkling sound. The other discovered a garden trowel Emily had left outside, batting it cautiously before determining it posed no threat. Their behavior showed none of the fear wild bobcats typically exhibited around human dwellings. "You're teaching them I'm not a threat," Emily whispered, watching the mother's relaxed vigilance. "Why would you do that?" In her 35 years of wildlife rehabilitation, Emily had never witnessed anything like this deliberate introduction. Wild mothers typically went to extreme lengths to keep their young away from human presence. The same scene repeated itself the following evening and the next. Each time the family stayed a little longer, ventured a little closer to the cabin. Emily began leaving her porch light on, providing just enough illumination to observe without disturbing them. She started a new journal, documenting their visits with the precise detail of her scientific training, but allowing herself the freedom to speculate, to wonder at the motivations behind this extraordinary behavior. On the 7th evening, Emily took a calculated risk. Instead of remaining inside, she positioned herself on the porch, seated in a chair as far from her offering as possible. The bobcat family's reaction was immediate. Upon emerging from the forest and spotting Emily, the mother froze, her body tensing. The kittens, sensing their mother's alarm, pressed themselves to the ground, nearly invisible against the darkening earth. Emily remained absolutely still, barely breathing, her eyes lowered in the non-threatening gaze she had used countless times with rehabilitation animals. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, the mother bobcat made a soft, chuffing sound. To Emily's astonishment, the kittens responded by slowly rising and moving to their mother's side. Rather than retreating, the family held their position at the forest's edge. watching Emily with cautious intensity. "It's okay," Emily said in the soft, even tone she had developed over decades of wildlife work. "I won't hurt you. I promise." She knew the words meant nothing to the bobcats, but the gentle cadence of her voice might communicate her non-threatening intention. The standoff continued until darkness made further observation impossible. Emily reluctantly went inside, leaving the food offering untouched on the porch. When she checked the next morning, the meat was gone and fresh tracks in the dewy grass confirmed the family had approached the porch after she'd gone inside. Progress continued in this halting manner. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Some evenings the family wouldn't appear at all. Other nights they would approach while Emily sat motionless on the porch, coming closer each time before the mother would determine they'd ventured far enough. The kittens grew visibly from week to week, their gangly adolescent proportions beginning to fill out with muscle, their movements becoming more coordinated, more predator-like. Emily found herself entranced by their developing personalities. The slightly larger kitten, whom she'd mentally dubbed Bold, often took the lead in exploration, while the smaller one, Shy, hung back, watching and learning before attempting anything new. The mother balanced discipline with indulgence, occasionally correcting over-enthusiastic explorations with a gentle but firm paw or a warning vocalization that sent the kittens scurrying back to her side. 2 months into this extraordinary relationship, a thunderstorm rolled across the mountains. The sudden crash of thunder and sheets of driving rain sent Emily hurrying inside from her garden. As lightning illuminated the cabin in stark white flashes, Emily found herself wondering where the bobcat family had sought shelter. Wild animals had their own ways of weathering storms, she reminded herself. They'd been surviving long before humans built cabins and worried about their welfare. The storm raged through the night, wind howling around the cabin's eaves, rain lashing against the windows with unrelenting force. Emily slept fitfully, waking at each particularly violent thunderclap. Just before dawn, as the storm began to subside, leaving behind only gentle rainfall, a sound cut through the pattering of raindrops on the roof, a distinctive vocalization Emily recognized immediately. The bobcat mother was calling from somewhere very close to the cabin. Emily was out of bed and pulling on boots before she had fully processed the sound. The distinctive call came again, urgent, insistent, unlike anything she had heard from the bobcat before. Grabbing a raincoat and flashlight, Emily stepped out into the gray dawn, rain still falling in a gentle patter around her. The forest dripped with moisture, every surface glistening in the weak morning light. "Where are you?" Emily called softly, scanning the tree line. Movement caught her eye, not at the forest's edge where she expected, but much closer. The bobcat mother stood at the corner of the cabin, her tawny coat darkened by rain, her eyes reflecting an uncharacteristic agitation. When she saw Emily, she made that same urgent sound, then took several steps toward the forest before looking back expectantly. Emily had seen this behavior before in working animals, the classic lassie-come-quick moment that appeared in countless stories but rarely in reality. Yet the bobcat's intent was unmistakable. She wanted Emily to follow. "What is it? The kittens?" Emily asked, knowing the animal couldn't understand her words, but responding instinctively to the urgency of the moment. The bobcat moved further toward the forest, stopping again to ensure Emily was following, making a split-second decision that defied every safety protocol she'd ever taught. Emily followed the predator into the rain-soaked forest. They moved at a steady pace, the bobcat leading the way along what appeared to be a well-worn animal trail. Emily struggled to keep up, brambles catching at her clothing, rain-slicked stones threatening to upend her footing. After several minutes of difficult travel, they reached a small clearing dominated by a lightning-struck pine. The massive tree had split down the middle, its splintered trunk gaping open to reveal a hollow base. A perfect natural den. As they approached, Emily heard faint mewling sounds coming from within the hollow. The bobcat mother entered without hesitation, emerging moments later dragging something small and struggling. With a shock, Emily realized it was one of the kittens, Shy, the smaller one. The young bobcat's hind leg was trapped in a twist of root and splintered wood, likely caused by the lightning strike that had damaged the tree. "Oh, little one," Emily breathed, understanding immediately why the mother had sought help. The kitten's predicament required dexterity and tools the bobcat didn't possess. With the storm weakening the tree further, the situation was life-threatening. The mother had made a desperate choice, gambling on the human connection she'd been cultivating for months. Emily approached cautiously, aware that despite their unusual relationship, she was dealing with a wild predator protecting injured young. The mother bobcat watched with tense vigilance but made no aggressive move as Emily knelt beside the trapped kitten. Up close, Emily could see that the young bobcat's leg wasn't broken, but firmly wedged in a way that would require careful extraction. "Easy now," Emily murmured, working slowly and methodically to free the kitten without causing further injury. The young bobcat hissed weakly, frightened by the close human contact despite the familiarity established over recent months. Its mother remained inches away, muscles tense, ready to intervene at the first sign of threat to her offspring. After several tense minutes of careful manipulation, the kitten's leg came free. Emily backed away immediately, giving space for the mother to inspect her young. The adult bobcat sniffed the kitten thoroughly, licking the injured leg before looking up at Emily with an intensity that made the hair on her arms rise. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding beyond scientific explanation. Without warning, the tree creaked ominously, weakened wood shifting in the saturated ground. The bobcat reacted instantly, grabbing the injured kitten by the scruff and darting away from the unstable trunk. Emily barely had time to follow suit before a massive section of the lightning-damaged pine collapsed exactly where they had been standing. The crash echoed through the forest, sending birds scattering from nearby trees. Heart-pounding, Emily watched as the bobcat mother assessed the situation. The tree that had served as their den was now a splintered ruin, uninhabitable and dangerous. Bold, the second kitten emerged from the underbrush where it had apparently been hiding, pressing against its mother's side with visible relief. Emily understood the precariousness of their situation. The bobcat family had just lost their shelter during kitten season, with predators abundant and one kitten nursing an injury. Finding and establishing a new den would be challenging under the best circumstances. During a stormy spring with young to protect, it could prove impossible. "Come with me," Emily said, the words emerging before she'd fully considered their implications. "Just until the storm passes." She began backing away, moving slowly toward her cabin, hoping against reason that the bobcat would understand. To Emily's astonishment, after a moment's hesitation, the bobcat mother picked up the injured kitten and began following her. The second kitten trailed behind, clearly confused by this departure from normal behavior but trusting its mother's judgment. Together, this unlikely procession made its way back through the rain-drenched forest to Emily's cabin. At the edge of the clearing, the mother bobcat paused, instincts warring with necessity. Emily continued to the porch, deliberately leaving the door slightly ajar before retreating to give the family space to make their decision. From inside, through a window, she watched the extraordinary scene unfold. The bobcat approached the cabin with extreme caution, setting down the injured kitten briefly to scout the porch. Finding no threat, she returned to her young, nudging them forward. The uninjured kitten took the lead, scrambling onto the wooden planks with youthful agility. Its sibling followed more slowly, favoring the recently freed leg. Their mother came last, her vigilance never wavering as she shepherded her family into this human territory. Emily's breath caught as she witnessed what must have been an unprecedented moment in wildlife behavior, a fully wild bobcat deliberately bringing her vulnerable offspring to a human dwelling for shelter. The family settled in the corner of the porch, as far from the door as possible while still remaining protected from the elements. The mother arranged herself between her kittens and the cabin door, a living barrier of maternal protection. Outside, the rain intensified again, drumming against the roof in a steady rhythm. Inside, Emily remained motionless, afraid the slightest movement might shatter this fragile trust. Through the window, she could see the bobcat mother watching the door, alert for any threat. Their eyes met across the distance, predator and human, connected by an understanding that defied scientific explanation. Dawn broke the following morning with lingering clouds but no rain. Emily had slept fitfully in a chair by the window, unwilling to move deeper into the cabin lest she startle her unexpected guests. The bobcat family remained huddled on the corner of the porch, the mother maintaining her vigilant watch throughout the night, the kitten sleeping in a spotted tangle of limbs against her warm flank. As sunlight gradually illuminated the porch, Emily watched the family stir. The mother rose first, stretching with feline grace before inspecting her kittens. The injured one, Shy, moved gingerly, testing the leg that had been trapped. Though favoring it slightly, the kitten showed remarkable recovery. Wild animals possessed astonishing resilience, Emily knew, but even so, the young bobcat's swift improvement surprised her. Emily's professional instincts battled with the unprecedented situation. Every wildlife rehabilitation protocol warned against allowing wild predators to become comfortable around human habitation. Yet these weren't ordinary circumstances. The bobcat mother had made a conscious choice to bring her young here, demonstrating a level of trust that defied conventional understanding. Moving with deliberate slowness, Emily opened the door and set out 3 shallow dishes, one with water, one with raw chicken, and a third with a special calcium-rich mixture she'd prepared from her dwindling supply of rehabilitation supplies. Then she retreated inside, giving the family space to approach the offering on their terms. The mother bobcat watched the door close, then cautiously investigated the dishes. She sniffed each carefully before taking a small portion of meat. Rather than consuming it immediately, she carried it to her kittens, offering them the first meal. Only after they had eaten did she return to take her share. This pattern established itself over the next 3 days as storms continued to roll across the mountains. The bobcat family remained on the porch, sheltering in the corner furthest from human activity. Emily provided food and fresh water twice daily, always maintaining a respectful distance. Each day, Shy's mobility improved, the injury healing with the remarkable speed of youth. On the 4th morning, Emily awoke to find the porch empty. The dishes she'd set out the previous evening were licked clean, but the bobcat family had vanished. A complex mixture of relief and loss washed over her. Relief that the natural order had been restored, wild animals returning to the wild where they belonged. Loss at the sudden absence of the connection that had formed between them. "It's for the best," Emily told herself, collecting the empty dishes. She had done what was needed, providing temporary sanctuary during a crisis. Now the mother would find a new den, establish new territory, and continue raising her young without human interference. The experience would become another extraordinary memory in a lifetime filled with wildlife encounters. Yet as Emily moved through her morning routine, she found herself repeatedly glancing toward the forest's edge, hoping for a glimpse of tawny fur or gleaming eyes. The cabin felt emptier somehow, the silence more pronounced without the subtle awareness of wild presence nearby. That evening, as Emily sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, a movement at the tree line caught her attention. The bobcat mother emerged from the underbrush, alone this time, carrying a freshly caught rabbit. With unhurried confidence, She approached the porch, deposited the rabbit at the foot of the steps, and retreated several yards to sit and watch. Emily stared at the offering, understanding blooming within her. This wasn't just food-sharing behavior. This was reciprocity. The mother had returned to repay the shelter and food Emily had provided during the storm. "Thank you," Emily said softly, stepping forward to accept the gift. The bobcat watched, seemingly satisfied before melting back into the forest shadows. For the next week, the pattern continued. The bobcat family remained absent during daylight hours, presumably establishing a new den somewhere in the forest. But each evening, just as dusk gathered, the mother would return, sometimes alone, sometimes with her kittens trailing behind her. She would bring an offering, a rabbit, a squirrel, once a grouse, place it near the porch and watch as Emily accepted it. Emily began leaving her own offerings in return, not just food, but objects she thought might interest the growing kittens. A feather collected on a morning walk, a small rubber ball she'd found in a forgotten corner of the cabin, a length of soft rope frayed at both ends. These items would disappear overnight, carried off to whatever new den the family had established. As spring progressed toward summer, the visits became more frequent and longer in duration. The kittens, now nearly half-grown, displayed increasing confidence, venturing onto the porch even when Emily sat quietly at the far end. Bold lived up to his nickname, once coming within arm's reach to investigate a book Emily was reading, while Shy maintained a more cautious approach, watching from the safety of the steps. Emily marveled at how the young bobcats were developing, their spotted coats gleaming with health, their movements becoming more coordinated and predator-like with each passing week. Yet unlike truly wild bobcats, they showed no fear of human presence. They were growing up in an extraordinary liminal space between wild and tame, neither fully one nor the other. "What are you teaching them?" Emily asked the mother one evening as the three bobcats lounged on her porch. "And why?" The question, of course, received no answer beyond the bobcat's steady golden gaze. Yet Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was purpose behind the animal's behavior, something beyond mere opportunism or food-seeking. On a warm June morning, Emily's satellite phone rang, a rare occurrence in her isolated existence. Marcus Reyes, her former colleague, sounded excited. "Emily, I've been reviewing those camera images you sent. This behavior is unprecedented in documented bobcat research. I've consulted with experts at 3 different universities and no one has seen anything like it." Emily gazed through the window at her empty porch, still bearing the subtle marks of bobcat visitation, a few tufts of fur caught on the railing, faint paw prints visible in the morning dew on the steps. "I think there's more to the story," she told him. "Something I haven't shared yet." A long pause followed before Marcus asked, "Are you ready to tell me now?" The following week, Marcus arrived at Emily's cabin, his university SUV navigating the rutted forest road with difficulty. Emily watched his approach from the porch, a mixture of anticipation and apprehension churning in her stomach. Sharing her extraordinary experience with a fellow scientist meant subjecting it to scrutiny, analysis, possibly even skepticism. Yet some part of her needed validation, confirmation that what was happening defied not just her understanding of wild behavior but everyone's. Marcus emerged from his vehicle, looking much as he had during their years working together, perpetually rumpled, eyes bright with curiosity behind wire-rimmed glasses. He carried a backpack loaded with equipment and embraced Emily warmly before stepping back to survey her mountain home. "So this is where you've been hiding," he said with a smile. "It suits you." "It does," Emily agreed, leading him inside. "Coffee?" They settled at her small kitchen table, steaming mugs between them as Emily recounted the full story, finding the bobcat in distress, the dangerous delivery, the weeks of subtle connection followed by the dramatic storm rescue. Marcus listened without interruption, his expression shifting from surprise to disbelief to wonder. "You assisted a wild bobcat birth," he said finally, "without sedation or restraints. Do you realize how improbable that survival was for either of you?" Emily raised her scarred forearm in acknowledgement. "I'm well aware. It was reckless, dangerous, and completely contrary to everything I've ever taught about wildlife intervention. And yet," Marcus gestured toward the window where the empty porch stood bathed in afternoon sunlight. "And yet," Emily agreed, "something extraordinary happened as a result." They spent the remainder of the day reviewing Emily's documentation, her journals, the camera footage, the progression of interactions she'd recorded. As a scientist, Marcus approached each piece of evidence with appropriate skepticism, searching for alternative explanations, challenging Emily's interpretations. But even his professional caution couldn't diminish the significance of what they were witnessing. "If this behavior is what it appears to be," he said as evening approached, "we're looking at evidence of cross-species reciprocity that goes far beyond anything previously documented in wild predators. Not just food sharing or tolerance of human presence, but actual recognition of assistance and deliberate repayment." "That's what I've been struggling to understand," Emily admitted. "It contradicts everything we know about bobcat behavior. They're solitary, territorial, instinctively wary of humans. And yet this mother is actively introducing her young to human presence," Marcus mused, "almost as if she's teaching them," Emily finished. "But teaching them what? And why?" As if in answer to their questions, a familiar shape materialized at the forest's edge. The bobcat mother emerged into the clearing, her two half-grown kittens trailing behind her. Upon spotting the unfamiliar vehicle in the drive, she froze, her posture instantly alert, tail twitching with tension. The kittens pressed close to her, taking cues from their mother's sudden wariness. Marcus inhaled sharply, instinctively reaching for the camera on the table beside him. "Don't move," Emily cautioned. "Let them decide." For several tense minutes, the bobcat family remained at the tree line, the mother's gaze fixed on the cabin with obvious uncertainty. Then, with visible deliberation, she began moving forward, her young following closely. They approached the porch with uncharacteristic caution, clearly aware of the unfamiliar human presence inside. "This is incredible," Marcus whispered, his camera capturing each moment as the family reached the porch steps. "She's bringing them despite detecting a stranger." "She's decided you're not a threat," Emily said softly, "because you're with me." The mother bobcat made a soft vocalizing sound, and the kittens settled at the base of the steps while she ascended alone. She carried no offering this time, but moved directly to the window where Emily and Marcus sat watching, placing one paw against the glass in a gesture that seemed almost deliberate. "I've never seen anything like this," Marcus breathed. "It's almost as if she's introducing herself," Emily finished, rising slowly from her chair. "I should go out, maintain the routine." Marcus followed Emily onto the porch, hanging back as she moved to the corner where she typically left food. The bobcat watched their emergence but showed no alarm, her golden eyes assessing Marcus with intelligent curiosity rather than fear. The kittens remained more cautious, pressing against each other at the bottom of the steps, their spotted coats blending with the dappled shadows. "She's brought them to meet you," Emily said quietly. "I think she understands you're important to me. Or she's simply investigating a potential threat to established territory," Marcus countered, scientist to the core despite his obvious wonder. "We have to be careful about anthropomorphizing," Emily nodded, acknowledging the caution, even as she placed fresh meat in the usual dishes. "Of course. But after everything that's happened, I can't help but feel there's something more intentional at work here." They watched as the mother descended to her kittens, making soft vocalizations that seemed to reassure them. After a moment's hesitation, All three bobcats approached the food. The mother allowed the kittens to eat first before taking her share, her eyes never leaving the humans on the porch. "You realize what this could mean for our understanding of wildlife cognition," Marcus said quietly. "The implications for conservation, for rehabilitation practices." "I do," Emily replied. "That's why I called you. This is bigger than my personal experience. It needs proper documentation, proper study." As darkness fell, Marcus set up additional wildlife cameras around the property while Emily prepared dinner. Their conversation over the meal centered on logistics, how to document the phenomenon without disrupting it, what protocols to establish, whether to bring in other researchers or maintain the controlled environment Emily had inadvertently created. "The university would fund a proper study," Marcus said, excitement evident in his voice. "Motion sensors, infrared cameras for night observation, DNA sampling from shed fur to confirm it's the same family." Emily nodded, but a growing unease settled in her stomach. The scientific part of her recognized the importance of proper documentation. Yet another part, the part that had connected with the bobcat mother through shared vulnerability, worried about transforming this extraordinary relationship into a research subject. "We need to proceed carefully," she cautioned. "Any dramatic change could drive them away permanently." The transformation of Emily's quiet mountain retreat began gradually. First came the additional cameras, strategically positioned to capture the bobcat family's comings and goings from multiple angles. Next arrived the specialized equipment for collecting DNA samples, hair traps designed to gather fur without disturbing the animals, swabs for saliva from partially consumed food. 2 weeks after Marcus's initial visit, a small research team made the journey up the mountain road. A veterinary specialist with expertise in wild felines, a behavioral ecologist, and a graduate student assigned to organize the growing mountain of data. Emily watched her sanctuary become a research station with mixed emotions. The scientist in her appreciated the methodical approach, the careful documentation of something truly extraordinary. But another part, a part she hadn't fully acknowledged until now, felt protective of the unique connection she'd established with the bobcat family. Each new person, each new piece of equipment, created another layer of distance between her and the wild creatures who had chosen, against all natural instinct, to trust her. "They're coming less frequently," Emily noted one evening, as she and Marcus reviewed the day's footage. 3 days had passed since the last bobcat sighting, the longest gap since the storm that had driven them to her porch. "It's not unexpected," Marcus replied, though concern shadowed his features. "Wild animals are sensitive to environmental changes. The increased human activity is bound to create some wariness." "I'm worried we're driving them away," Emily admitted. "That in our effort to understand this relationship, we're destroying it." The research continued despite her concerns. The university had fast-tracked funding for the study, recognizing its potential significance. Preliminary DNA analysis confirmed what Emily had known intuitively. The kittens were indeed offspring of the mother she had assisted during birth. Their age aligned perfectly with the timeline she had documented, their genetic markers identifying them as siblings from the same litter. More surprising were the findings from the mother's DNA. The behavioral ecologist, Dr. Patel, presented their analysis with barely contained excitement over a video call projected onto Emily's kitchen wall. "She's not entirely wild, Doctor," Patel explained, pointing to highlighted sections of a genetic report. "We're seeing markers consistent with an animal that spent time in captivity, likely rehabilitation, before being released back into the wild." "But that would mean," Emily began. "She's encountered humans before," Marcus finished, "possibly during a previous rehabilitation." Emily processed this revelation with growing wonder. If the mother had been a rehabilitation case herself, it would explain her uncharacteristic response to human assistance. She wasn't defying wild instinct, but drawing on learned experience, the knowledge that humans had helped her once and might do so again. We're cross-referencing DNA with rehabilitation center records within a 200-mile radius, Dr. Patel continued. If she was a documented case, we might be able to trace her history. The conversation continued, analyzing behavioral patterns, discussing potential publications, debating the wider implications for wildlife conservation and human-predator relationships. Emily participated, offering insights from her decades of experience, but part of her attention remained focused on the empty porch visible through her kitchen window. Where was the Bobcat family? Had the scientific invasion driven them away permanently? Her answer came 3 nights later. Emily woke to the distinctive sound she had come to recognize, the soft call of the mother bobcat, closer than usual. Moving to the window, she found the porch empty but the sound continuing, drawing her attention toward the forest edge. There, barely visible in the moonlight, stood the mother bobcat, alone without her kittens, watching the cabin with unmistakable intent. Emily slipped outside, ignoring the cameras that would be recording this midnight encounter. The bobcat waited unmoving as Emily approached to within 20 feet. "What is it?" Emily asked softly. "Why are you here without your little ones?" As if in response, the bobcat turned and took several steps toward the forest before looking back expectantly, the same behavior she had displayed during the storm when leading Emily to her trapped kitten. This time, however, Emily hesitated. Following a wild predator into the forest at night, alone without telling anyone, violated every safety protocol she had ever taught. And yet, this was the same animal who had trusted Emily with the lives of her young, who had shown intelligence and intention far beyond what science currently attributed to her species. After a moment's consideration, Emily returned to the cabin for a flashlight, left a hastily scrawled note for Marcus, who was asleep in the guest room, and followed the bobcat into the night. They traveled deeper into the forest than during their previous journey, following a winding game trail that climbed steadily upward toward a rocky outcropping. The bobcat moved with purpose, periodically pausing to ensure Emily kept pace. Finally, they reached what appeared to be their destination, a small clearing beneath an overhanging cliff that formed a natural shelter. And there, huddled together in a hollow beneath the rock face, were the 2 kittens. But they weren't alone. A third bobcat kitten, noticeably smaller and more fragile than Emily's familiar pair, lay between them. Its breathing was labored, its tiny body trembling visibly even in the dim light of Emily's flashlight. The mother bobcat made a soft sound, moving to stand beside this unfamiliar kitten, then looked up at Emily with what could only be described as pleading in her golden eyes. Emily knelt slowly, processing what she was witnessing. The third kitten was a runt, likely from the same litter but separated during the storm, perhaps unable to keep up during the family's relocation, perhaps thought lost or dead until recently rediscovered. Now it was sick or injured, and the mother had made an extraordinary decision once again, to seek Emily's help. "Oh my God," Emily whispered, understanding blooming within her. This wasn't simply about reciprocity or learned association. This was something far more profound, an intelligent wild animal making a conscious choice to trust a human with the most vulnerable member of her family. The mother bobcat watched intently as Emily carefully examined the third kitten. Its condition was concerning. Dehydration, possible infection, significant weakness. It needed medical intervention quickly. With gentle movements, Emily removed her outer shirt, creating a soft bundle to transport the fragile creature. "I'll help," she promised, gathering the tiny kitten with practiced hands, just like before. The mother made no move to stop her, and the 2 stronger kittens, bold and shy, watched with what appeared to be trust rather than fear as Emily lifted their struggling sibling. Together, this unlikeliest of processions made their way back toward the cabin, where science and compassion would once again intersect in a story without precedent in documented wildlife behavior. Dawn was breaking as Emily emerged from the forest with the frail kitten bundled against her chest, the mother bobcat and her two healthy offspring following close behind. The research team, alerted by Emily's note and her prolonged absence, had gathered on the porch in various states of concern and confusion. Marcus spotted her first, relief washing over his features before his eyes registered the procession behind her. "Emily, what in the world?" he began, then fell silent as he comprehended what he was witnessing. The mother bobcat, rather than hanging back at the forest's edge as expected, continued directly to the cabin steps, her two stronger kittens close behind. The message was unmistakable. She was accompanying her sick young to ensure its care. "We need the medical kit," Emily called, cradling the tiny bundle as she approached. "And call Dr. Lin. Tell her it's an emergency." The cabin erupted into focused activity. The veterinary specialist, Dr. Lin, had returned to the university 2 days earlier, but could advise remotely until she made the 3-hour drive back. Marcus cleared the kitchen table, covering it with clean towels as Emily gently placed the weakened kitten down for examination. "It's the runt," she explained as the team gathered around. "Must have been separated during the storm. Severely dehydrated, possible respiratory infection." Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking vital signs, assessing reflexes. "Temperature's dangerously low. We need to stabilize it immediately." Most astonishing to everyone present was the behavior of the mother bobcat. Rather than retreating to a safe distance, she jumped onto a nearby chair, positioning herself to observe the proceedings with intense focus. The two healthy kittens remained at the base of the chair, seemingly taking cues from their mother's unusual calm. "This defies everything we understand about wild predator behavior," Dr. Patel whispered, documenting the scene with reverent precision. "A mother bringing her vulnerable young to humans for medical assistance. She's done it before," Emily reminded them, administering fluids to the dehydrated kitten via a small syringe. "The night of the storm, she's making a conscious choice based on past experience." Over the next several hours, Emily and the team worked to save the struggling kitten. Dr. Lin provided guidance via video call, her expertise proving invaluable as they administered antibiotics, fluids, and nutritional supplements. Throughout the process, the mother bobcat remained vigilant but calm, occasionally making soft vocalizations that seemed to soothe both the patient and its siblings. By mid-afternoon, the kitten's condition had stabilized somewhat. Its breathing remained labored but more regular, its tiny body responding to the medical intervention. Emily constructed a makeshift incubator from a plastic storage container lined with heating pads and soft blankets, creating a controlled environment for the fragile creature. "Will it survive?" Marcus asked quietly as they watched the tiny chest rise and fall. "It's too soon to tell," Emily answered honestly. "The next 24 hours will be critical, but it has a fighting chance now, which is more than it had in the forest." The scientific implications of the day's events dominated the team's discussion as they gathered in the living room, speaking in hushed tones to avoid disturbing the feline family. The mother bobcat had finally settled on a blanket near the incubator, her healthy kittens curled against her side, all three watching the humans with alert but unthreatened attention. "We're witnessing something unprecedented," Dr. Patel insisted, reviewing footage from the cabin's cameras. "Cross-species trust and communication at a level previously undocumented in wild predators. The mother isn't just tolerating human presence, she's actively seeking human assistance for specific problems she can't solve alone. And she's teaching this behavior to her young," added the graduate student, gesturing toward the kittens who had grown comfortable enough to groom themselves in full view of the research team. They're learning that humans can be allies rather than threats. The implications for conservation are enormous, Marcus said, excitement evident in his voice despite his attempt at scientific detachment. If this behavior could be replicated or encouraged in rehabilitation settings. Emily listened to their theories with one ear, her attention divided between the scientific discussion and the practical reality of the sick kitten's care. Every 20 minutes, she checked the tiny patient, adjusting temperature, administering medication, ensuring proper hydration. Each time, the mother bobcat watched attentively, her golden eyes following Emily's movements with what could only be described as trust. As night fell, the research team retired to their tents pitched near the cabin, leaving Emily alone with the bobcat family. She settled into a chair near the incubator, prepared for a night of vigilance. To her surprise, the mother bobcat jumped lightly onto the arm of her chair, positioning herself so that she too could monitor the sick kitten's progress. "We're quite the team, aren't we?" Emily said softly. The bobcat turned her gaze from the incubator to Emily's face, blinking slowly in what feline behaviorists recognized as a sign of comfort and trust. In that moment, the line between scientific observation and emotional connection blurred beyond recognition. This wasn't just an unprecedented wildlife interaction, it was a relationship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Throughout the night, Emily dozed intermittently, waking to check the kitten and administer medication as needed. Each time, she found the mother bobcat still alert, still watching, occasionally making soft sounds that seemed to communicate with the ailing young one. By morning, the runt's condition showed marked improvement. Its breathing easier, its tiny body warmer, its reflexes stronger. When Dr. Lynn arrived shortly after dawn, she found a scene that defied conventional veterinary experience, a wild bobcat mother sitting calmly beside a human, as both attended to a sick kitten. "In 20 years of wildlife medicine, I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Lynn admitted as she examined the improving patient. "This goes beyond learned behavior or habituation. She understands exactly what we're doing." "She's brought her whole family into this relationship," Emily agreed, watching as the two healthy kittens explored the cabin's main room under their mother's watchful eye. Not just for food or shelter, but for genuine assistance. She's making choices that contradict everything we think we know about wildlife behavior. As the morning progressed, the research team documented every interaction with meticulous care. The story emerging from their observations wasn't just scientifically significant, it was emotionally powerful, a testament to intelligence and adaptability that transcended species boundaries. 1 year later, Emily stood on her porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in amber and gold. The cabin had changed since that remarkable spring. Solar panels now powered additional equipment, a small greenhouse extended from the southern wall, and a dedicated wildlife observation platform had been constructed at the forest's edge. But the most significant changes weren't visible to casual observation. The academic paper documenting the bobcat family's unprecedented behavior had been published in Nature 3 months earlier, sending ripples through the wildlife conservation community. Cross-species recognition and reciprocity in wild bobcats had sparked heated debate, challenges to established understanding, and a surge of new research into animal cognition. Emily's name appeared third in the author list by her own choice, her contribution to the science undeniable, but her personal connection to the subject something she preferred to keep partially separate from the academic spotlight. A familiar sound drew her attention to the tree line. The bobcat mother emerged from the forest, her movements still graceful, but carrying the slight weight gain of a second successful pregnancy. Behind her, 3 half-grown bobcats followed in loose formation, bold and shy, now approaching adult size, and between them, smaller but healthy, the runt that had nearly died in Emily's care. The family made their way across the clearing toward the cabin with unhurried confidence. This was their routine now, regular visits that varied with seasons and hunting conditions, but remained a consistent part of life on the mountain. They no longer needed to bring offerings, though occasionally they still did. The relationship had evolved beyond transaction into something more complex, a mutual recognition that defied conventional categorization. "Our visitors are here," Emily called through the open door. Marcus emerged from the cabin, tablet in hand, still documenting even after months of observation. "Right on schedule," he noted with a smile. "Mother's looking healthy, probably due in about 3 weeks, based on her size." The BOBCAT family approached the porch steps with familiar ease. Bold, living up to his name, ascended first, followed by the mother. Shy and Runt, as they were still called despite Emily's attempts at more dignified names, remained at the bottom, watching attentively. Their behavior had stabilized into a remarkable pattern, comfortable with human presence while maintaining essential wild instincts, a balance that had fascinated researchers from universities across the country. "The university called again," Marcus said quietly as they watched the BOBCATs settle on the porch. "They're pressing for a decision on the research center proposal." Emily nodded, her feelings still mixed. The university wanted to establish a permanent wildlife cognition research station on the property, expanding the cabin into a facility that would host rotating teams of scientists and graduate students. The potential for advancing understanding of wildlife behavior was significant, but at what cost to the unique relationship that had developed here? "I'm still thinking about it," she replied, watching as Bold investigated a book she'd left on the porch table. After the dramatic rescue of the third kitten, the research team had remained on site for 6 months, documenting the extraordinary interactions between Emily and the BOBCAT family. DNA analysis had finally identified the mother's origins. She had indeed been a rehabilitation case, orphaned as a kitten and raised at a wildlife center 3 counties away, before being released back into the wild 4 years earlier. The experience had apparently created a neural framework for associating humans with assistance rather than threat, a framework she was now passing on to her offspring. Most remarkable had been the development of the runt. After surviving its critical first days under Emily's care, the kitten had thrived. Though permanently smaller than its siblings, it had grown into a healthy juvenile bobcat with one distinctive characteristic: an unusual comfort with human proximity. While its siblings maintained a cautious distance except on the familiar territory of Emily's porch, Runt would sometimes approach within touching distance, though Emily carefully avoided reinforcing this behavior with direct contact. "Whatever you decide about the research center," Marcus said, breaking into her thoughts, "what you've discovered here has already changed how we understand wildlife cognition. The rehabilitation protocols being developed based on your documentation could transform how we prepare animals for release." Emily smiled, watching as the mother bobcat groomed Runt with methodical attention. "I didn't discover anything. She did. I was just lucky enough to be there when she decided to share it." The sun dipped below the mountain ridge, bathing the porch in the day's final golden light. As if responding to this natural cue, the bobcat mother rose and stretched, signaling to her offspring that it was time to return to the forest. One by one they descended the steps, first Bold, then Shy, then Runt, looking back once as if in farewell. The mother was last, pausing at the top of the steps to meet Emily's gaze with that same intelligent assessment that had captivated her from the beginning. "See you tomorrow," Emily said softly. The bobcat blinked slowly before following her young into the gathering dusk. Later that evening, reviewing the day's observation notes, Emily came to a decision. The research center would proceed, but with strict limitations. No permanent residents except for herself and maximum 2 researchers at any time. No disruption to the forest beyond what was absolutely necessary. And most importantly, The bobcat family's territory would remain protected, a sanctuary within a sanctuary. As Emily prepared for bed, movement on the porch caught her attention. Through the window, she saw the bobcat mother had returned alone. She sat centered on the porch, tail wrapped neatly around her paws, gazing at the cabin with serene composure. There was no distress in her posture, no urgency in her presence, just a quiet companionship that transcended the usual boundaries between wild and human. Emily stepped outside, settling into her porch chair as she had so many nights before. The bobcat remained where she was, neither approaching nor retreating, simply sharing the space in comfortable silence. Together they sat, human and wild predator, connected by an understanding that had begun in crisis but evolved into something far more profound. The scientific papers would document the behavior. The research would quantify the cognition. But here, in the quiet darkness of a Montana night, Emily knew the true significance couldn't be captured in journal articles or data points. What had happened on this mountain was a glimpse across the divide that separated species, a recognition of intelligence, intention, and connection that challenged our understanding of the wild world and our place within it. As if reading her thoughts, the bobcat rose and moved closer, settling at Emily's feet with unprecedented trust. Tomorrow would bring new researchers, new questions, new discoveries. The story of the bobcat family would continue to unfold, documented and analyzed by curious minds seeking to understand what Emily had come to accept as a beautiful mystery. Some relationships defied scientific explanation. Some connections transcended the boundaries we believed separated us from the wild. On a remote mountain porch beneath a canopy of stars, one such connection had changed everything. For a woman who had sought solitude, for a bobcat who had broken every rule of wild behavior, and for our understanding of what was possible between humans and the creatures with whom we share this world.